Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Korea Deconstructed. My name's David. Thank you for being here with us. And I'm joined to my right by a friend. It's his second time here. His name is Suk Jihoon, Korean historian. He got his BA and MA on Korean modern history from Yonsei University. Studied Korean studies briefly at the University of Michigan. Now a PhD candidate at Yonsei University, doing extensive research on the colonial era cultural history of Korea. For those that don't know, many of us who do Korean studies, we look at Jihoon's work online, particularly on social media, his Facebook posts, and when we need questions, we sometimes direct them to him. One of my previous guests, Rania Havez, a friend of mine, we talked about creating an app called Ask Jihoon, where if you ever have a question about Korean history, this is the man. So I have many questions about Korean history for you, Jihoon. Shall we start? Korean history as division, because we often think of Korea as a unified, homogenous, these ideas that define its people, they're together, they have uri, they have this collective consciousness and all of these things, and that's the image that we have. But when you live and work here, you realize that some divisions run deep and some of them might be historically based. So I want to ask you this first. Do numbers matter? Does the start of Korea matter? So, like, I've heard before,
sense,
is it like, does Korea start in 1919? Does it start in 1948? Do the left and the right here disagree on when Korea starts?
There's this whole tendency about the right-wing groups trying to make the provisional government of Korea, which was initially in Shanghai, of course, as some kind of like, leftist group. It wasn't. It really was a fairly, it started to have some kind of a social democratic kind of approach in the 1940s. But at the very beginning of it, and some of the more core members of it, including Kim Gu, on the other hand, they were far from being socialist. They were very, very leaning towards the right. So I don't understand why people are making this big fuss about it, actually. I mean, another big interesting, one big, if you will, evidence of like people didn't really make a big fuss about it back in 1948 when the real Republic of Korea, South Korea as we know today, was established as a full-fledged government, modern government. Lee Syngman himself, the first president of the Republic of Korea, he states in one of his earliest addresses that this government is 30 years old. People might actually assume that this was a newborn government, but it isn't. It has been in this form for 30 years. That's his words, not mine. He himself had no trouble with it. So, but then the ones who are actually arguing about 1948 to be the Konggukjeol or whatever, the Foundation Day, they are the ones who are actually glorifying and almost like sanctifying Lee Syngman, but then, they don't seem to understand the history.
In terms of, are there any numbers that we're missing? So Lee Syngman, who was part of the 1919 government in Shanghai.
He joined it, yes.
Yeah, okay. He joined it?
He didn't start it, but he did join it later on. He had his own government, his own sets of government, what he called the Hansung government, the Seoul government, so to speak. That was pretty much short-lived. It was pretty much on paper only, but then he pretty much joined the provisional government in Shanghai fairly early on. And he actually had become the president of the provisional government, and which he served until 1925, I think it was. But then, of course, he was impeached in 1925. And afterward, but then he still didn't completely cut ties with the provisional government because, again, that also gave him the authority, so to speak, of what he was actually doing in the States. But as a lobbyist, pro-Korean lobbyist, and there was no doubt. And some people, especially the left-wing side of people, they tend to disagree they tend to dismiss the notion that Lee Syngman was anti-Japanese. In fact, some of them do want to say picture him, paint a picture of him as a kind of like a pro-Japanese. It's far from that. He never was. He was probably the most anti-Japanese president we actually had in this 80 years of history so far. But anyhow, but yeah, so
can you say something about, because we're going to come on to old Lee Seung-man when we talk about the history, but do you have anything to say about young Lee Seung-man, just as you're continuing here?
Well, I mean, there are lots of like there are a number of specialists on that matter. But then, I think one of the best books that that had discussed about what Lee Seung-man was doing in his younger years, not terribly young, but again, like younger years, especially his time in the United States. I think the best book to read is Foreign Friends by David Fields.
Yeah, bow tie wearing academic.
Yeah. Good friend of mine too. But then I think that book is probably one of the best, book about like what he was actually doing in, in the United States. And yeah, it actually paints a very complicated picture on the man. He was, I mean, from the very beginning till the end, he was until the liberation of 1945. He was most definitely anti-Japanese. But at the same time, he did not hesitate when it comes to like, making a pact with the devil, so to speak. He really, spoke with like sets of people who are like not necessarily the most high esteemed people, but in order to achieve his purposes, he actually collaborated with a lot of questionable people. And but I think it's just again, overall, I mean, there are lots of like interesting people coming along the way in the whole book. But I do suggest that you should actually check this book out because it really gives you an idea of how like complicated his legacy was especially as a like activist of some sort in the U.S. at the time. So.
Lee Seung-man has been sort of held as a villain by one side and a hero by another, and it feels like today how you hold him and Park Chung-hee it feels like Korea doesn't have a correct understanding of history in the public sphere.
Well, I mean, I always have my trouble with when somebody's actually saying correct way of understanding history.
Okay.
What I'm trying to say. Well, I might say that I might try to argue with the unbiased and well-backed kind of history, so to speak. But again, there's not necessarily a correct version of history. It's something that most historians would actually agree with, because again, everybody's had their different interpretation of things, and every scholars, every historians, every even laymen for that matter, they all have their their different different images of the past, so to speak. So again, we're living in a democratic society, so I just don't understand. I just don't argue with this notion of correctness. There's no such thing. At the same time, however, you really, I'm also very much against the idea about how anyone can actually, either to glorify somebody or to villainize somebody. Just like these two, like Park Chung-hee and Lee Seung-man, those two, they really don't have any middle ground for these people. And I do think we should, despite all the shortcomings and all the other things that we really need to put into our consideration. So that's just how I see it. But that's something I can.
We need to make them, in the words of Viet Thanh Nguyen, the Vietnamese American historian, we need to make them round characters, because at the moment they're sort of flat caricatures.
They are definitely very grossly exaggerated caricatures. And and one other thing that I don't understand about, of course, is that when it comes to like the modern right-wing groups, particularly far-right groups, they always try to put the Lee Seung-man and Park Chung-hee in the same parenthesis, which is very problematic, because Park Chung-hee, during his entire time in his power, 18 years, 61 to 79, he always loathed and publicly despised what Lee Seung-man was doing had done to the country. He did not mince his words. And the public education at the time was also reflecting that kind of sentiment as well, because again, it was extremely critical about Lee Seung-man and his government and his overall legacies. So I don't understand. I really genuinely don't understand why somebody can actually put these people, put these two people, very different people, in the same parenthesis and try to glorify them both, all at the same breath. Now there's this thing, I think there's this, organization known as the Reebok School, I think it was, which is, of course, the whole way about, glorifying these two. But again, they are not doing it correctly, if I must say so, because again, there's no way in hell then anybody can actually try to, make both ends work. You see, so
can you say something about Park Chung-hee's criticisms or what he said against Lee Seung-man?
Well, first thing that he said. So during his early campaign years, so let me, for those who are listening, Park Chung-hee, of course, came into power by the military coup that he led in 1961, May 1961. But from 61 to 63, he was the chairman of this above law kind of organization. I'm not going to go too much of details on it. But then in 63, he actually ran for the presidential campaign after becoming a civilian by, of course, being discharged from the army. And he published 2 books in his name. It's very much like to be ghostwritten, but again, it's because, the language and the the vocabulary is definitely not his. But I think it does still, back up pretty much what he was actually thinking about. It's just that somebody was actually elaborating on it. In both of these books, Our Nation's Past, one is called, and The Nation, the Revolution and I is the second book. In both books, he clearly says that Lee Seung-man was senile. He shouldn't have become the president from the beginning. He also let all these people, corrupt people. Some of them are pro-Japanese also. Yeah, he also makes accusations of that. And let the country go down the drains. He really did not mince his words. So and he kept on doing that. And of course, after he became the president in 1965, Lee Seung-man finally died in his exile in Hawaii. They had a state funeral, of course, because after all, he was still the first president of the Korea. He did not show up. He did not go to the state funeral. He didn't do that because he loathed the man, Park Chung-hee, that is. There are, and of course, till the very end, of course, before his assassination in '79, I mean, he maintained that premise. He maintained that status, and he was not getting softer or anything. It's just how it is. In fact, another thing that I also want to add is that he actually justified his own actions. I mean, the Yushin constitution and his path to the dictatorship by using Lee Seung-man as a bad example. What he was trying to argue was that Lee Seung-man was too American. And because he was too American, but then the Koreans were not necessarily sophisticated enough to fully understand the American democracy, American version of democracy. Park Chung-hee basically, and his cronies, basically argued that, what Lee Seung-man was doing in the name of democracy was wrong, because it was pretty much ill-fitting to most people in Korea at the time. And there are certain people out there who still kind of believes it that way. But again, at the same time, I still don't understand how, the modern day, far-right groups are actually trying to make it work, so to speak, with these very conflicting, statements.
Lee Seung-man was a very old man when he left. Yeah. Is there any validity to the claims of him being senile? I'm a medical doctor, but
I'm not a medical doctor myself, of course. But then, and David Fields might actually have something to say about it too. But when he became the president in 1948, I think he was still very alert and knew what he was doing. But I think by his third presidency, which of course started in 1956, I think it started to go down. I think he really started to go downhill, and he rarely appeared on from then on. Before that, he really showed up everywhere. But after that, you have to realize that he was already 81 years old by this point, and which was fairly advanced age at the time. And yeah, from then on, I think you started to see, he was increasingly, not visible on major big events. He did show up, but then not as much as he used to. I think David Fields told me once that he actually went through some of these, personal papers many years ago when he was working in the Syngman archive at the Yonsei University. Yeah, Yonsei actually has the archive, and I think he told me that he actually went through some of these letters written by his wife, Francesca Donner, the Austrian. So yeah, the Korea's first lady was an Austrian, believe it or not. Anyway, she pretty much claims, according to what I was told, that he is just not capable anymore, and sometimes she actually signs it for him, because of course before marrying her, she was his secretary for many years. So. Anyhow, but then that's one thing, and there were quite a lot of other concerning instances, but again, nothing to prove there. But then whether he was really senile and having severe mental degradation or whatnot, it didn't matter, because again, by 1960, of course, all hell broke loose, and of course we had the rigged election in 1960, which of course led to the April 1960 revolution. So,
should it be of interest that Korea's first lady was Austrian, was foreign? Because it seems like that wouldn't happen today, or couldn't. There would be more talk about it. Is it of interest?
It could be, but then at the time, people didn't really made a big fuss about it back in the day, because again, everybody assumed that Lee Syngman lived almost 40 years. In a foreign country, and of course, a man should have a wife. But then, of course, there's not hardly any Koreans roaming around in the United States. So I think they just, at the time, they actually accepted it as a matter of fact. But then, of course, now, when people think about things, and especially when now Koreans are increasingly getting more racist, in my opinion, I think it could be quite problematic to some people. But then, and of course, the good old Ibak school people, they don't say a word about her.
This is fascinating, by the way, genuinely. Just before we come to Park Chung-hee, how do you think we should teach people about Lee Syngman today? What history textbooks? I know you can't consume one man's life into a few sentences, but how do we portray him? How do we get him across?
I think Lee Syngman as a person, I don't think he was just there's this tendency of making him this kind of like a vicious Machiavellian kind of a figure. I don't think he was. I mean, he obviously, when he was getting desperate, like I said, he had his way of, making alliances with some of the more questionable people.
There were political assassinations in Jeju, and does this or not?
What about what?
To my understanding, there were political assassinations of his rivals while he was going.
Hawaii?
No, in South Korea.
Don't think so.
Okay.
No. Well, he executed one. He executed one of his biggest political rival, Cho Bong-am, in 1957. And there have been some suspicions about Shin-hee, his opponent's sudden demise during the presidential campaign in 1956. But again, nothing is proven. He was already quite ill. Shin-hee was, and of course, 1960, another the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, the final election for him. His opponent, Cho Byung-ok, he also died, but then he died of cancer. So yeah, he was, I guess, incredibly lucky in that regard. No, I think this, and he definitely had some degree of factionalism. He definitely had, I don't know, he had his own quirks. I would say I wouldn't say too much because it's getting too complicated for now. But overall, I think he was what he was doing in the United States during the teens and the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, before the liberation, that is. I think as an activist and a political campaigner, I think he did a marvelous job. But as a president, as the president of the country, and you have to realize that his understanding of political science was early in the 1900s. He always was extremely proud of his PhD from Princeton, which was a pretty mediocre work, if I'm being honest.
You've read it?
Yeah, I read it.
Yeah.
I read his dissertation. It's not much of a dissertation to begin with, but anyhow, some people might actually some people will actually throw a target on my back right now because that actually said this. But then it's a pretty mediocre piece of work. I mean, I can tell you that, even for the 1910 standard, I think. But his understanding of political science was very, very primitive. What I say by that is that this is 1910. He, at the time, there was no understanding of, modern day notion of government, policy makings or any of that. And, he cared only about diplomacy, and that's what he actually did. I mean, as a campaigner and pamphleteer, he was an influence. He was an influence in diplomatic world, but he didn't know much of anything else. So trying to give him a, this big admin job for a modern republic, democratic republic, that was already a bad sign. But then he was, again, quite lucky that he actually had some allies to support him. And there were some genuine successes during his years, even with the big Korean War thing. Of course, he cannot escape from, his actions of evacuating Seoul without notifying. And of course, pretty much had a carefree approaches about, massacres and all kinds of other things, compromises during the war. But that's just how it is.
It's complex, and I love how complex you make it. And
it is very complex. There's no way to simplify this man's life. But I think that, again, I'm quoting verbatim from David Fields, and I think at the end of the book that I just told you about, I think he said that as a president of Republic of Korea, Lee Syngman was a constant source of embarrassment for the Americans. And I think that was the right way to put it, because that's how I actually see it from reading through the papers and the statistical sources. Again, the Americans, well, they didn't see any other alternatives, but again, at the same time, they didn't like him from the beginning. Ever since the military governments and the military government came in 1945, but again, that's for another time.
He spoke English. He was a Christian, and
he spoke English
like
with
communists.
A very peculiar accent. It's very difficult. I heard him I tell you, I'm probably the only the person in the whole world right now who actually heard him speak more than anybody else alive, because I had done so much work with his audio recordings. But no, his English is bizarre. It not necessarily grammar-wise. I mean, his grammar is good. I mean, okay. But then his pronunciation and his intonation is quite wacky. It's sometimes it really takes a while to actually to get used to it. But once you get into it, you actually understand him. But and he could be quite funny and witty and whatever. So so again, I can tell you that I actually went through quite a lot about this man. Same thing with Park Chung-hee or anybody else. So for more than average, definitely more than average than your average, person living in Korea. So I had gotten to a lot of gotten access to a lot of materials that actually complicates and of course sort of like make it more like a 3D, if you will. Both of these people are long gone, but then I can almost make them pop up in my head. But then again, but that does not necessarily mean that of course I like them as people. But
can we? It's fascinating what you're doing, and I'm very glad. Can we go to Park Chung-hee then? Because the right puts these two figures together. You've done a wonderful job of showing how complex Lee Seung-man is. I think Brian Myers said last year that it's not Kim Il-sung, but it's Park Chung-hee who is the most consequential figure in Korean history of the 20th century.
Oh, okay.
Because, somebody's got to have that title, and Kim Il-sung's pretty consequential, and Park Chung-hee is also pretty consequential. It's a personal opinion, I guess, but how can we...
I actually like that, I actually like that kind of assessment, so to speak. Again, like, it simplifies a lot of things, but again, whether we like it or not, or even for the North Koreans for that matter, Park Chung-hee is still like giving a long-lasting legacy. There's no doubt about that. And I do understand why some people, especially people who lived through Park Chung-hee's time, my parents and pretty much everybody who lived through the 60s and 70s and onward, who are still roaming around and pretty much active in their fields. I do understand why they have a very sympathetic feeling towards the man, because again, my mother still says that, for the first 18 years of her life, when they talked about the president, it was always Park Chung-hee because he was the one. So when he died, when he was assassinated in 1979, she was in tears, apparently. She actually went to the Blue House, 청와대, the presidential residence, to actually pay her respect back in 1979. And I think that was a genuine emotion that people actually had. It was not something that the government actually imposed on or like forced them to. But again, I actually wrote about this not too long ago, but again, even if somebody actually lived through this specific time period in the past, you don't actually know about it fully, because there are a lot of things that you don't know about. As a person who actually lived there, I mean, your source of information was fairly limited at the time. You are not necessarily in the position of knowing everything, knowing all the like behind the scenes things that we have access to, historians have access to. So it's quite dangerous to say that I lived through that time, and how can you actually know about it better than I do? No, we actually know better about that time. I mean, same thing applies to American history, for instance. I mean, people lived through the Eisenhower era, the JFK era, and of course the Cuban Missile Crisis, for instance. Back in 1963, Cuban Missile Crisis, I mean, most Americans didn't grasp how serious it was because, the government didn't tell them anything about it. They only had 2 televised addresses, that's all, about from the beginning to the end, of course. But then we do know that Khrushchev, Castro, and JFK was butting heads with each other, and it was almost close to the meltdown at the time. But we know that now. But back in '63, nobody hadn't had the faintest idea about that, right? So it's exactly like that. So Park Chung-hee, again, I do understand that some people, especially the older folks, who they tend to have opinions, and it was not as bad as it seems. That kind of thing. Of course, I understand that, but it's the truth, and the whole picture is much more complicated than that.
Was he more than a president? Because you said your mother went down to Cheongwon, and it was not brainwashing, but that's how people felt, and they would have called him Kaka 대통령, and some people would call him Aborji. That's his official title. Was he more than a president to people at the time?
To a certain extent, yes, I think it was. Again, part of the charm that he had from the very beginning, and this is again something that people don't seem to understand. During his first campaign as a presidential candidate in 1963, his opponents, the Minjudang people, led by Yoon Bo-sun, who was the incumbent president at the time, they actually uncovered his past, meaning that he had a very strong communist sympathizing tendencies, and he was almost executed for that in 1948. His older brothers were all very prominent socialist / communist, and so they actually uncovered that up. And what Park Chung-hee was actually saying about it at the time was that this is a slander campaign. It's a McCarthyism. It's a form of McCarthyism, happening in Korea at the time, and and this is a smear campaign from all these rich landlord ex-loan ex-Yangban classes. And I'm the son of a farmer. So again, that clearly resonated quite a lot of voters at the time. Yoon Bo-sun still refused to believe the outcome that he lost the majority vote, and he this hilarious word that Yoon Bo-sun continued to use until his death, which was the 정신적 대통령, spiritual president, because again he could not believe that people could actually vote for Park Chung-hee. But no, I don't think the election was rigged. Again, this was very well. Yeah, whatever what they say on the internet right now, since 1960. Most elections that ever happened in Korea was not rigged. We have a fairly solid record on that. So yeah, again, people genuinely voted for him, and he was giving a lot of promises. He was giving a lot of plans that people liked about, and they could actually see what was being done. The progress was visible to them many times. Again, there's a big myth about that the whole thing was big. The economic growth in the 60s and 70s was the biggest in the world. It wasn't. Pakistanis actually had better, economic growth when it comes to statistics are concerned. And it was not. How should I put it? Again, it was a sizable growth, but again, even in his dying year, in 1979, South Korea was still poorer than North Korea. So he was not necessarily that successful to what modern day far right groups are trying to show. But at the same time, however, that didn't really necessarily count on most people who actually lived through that time period, because again, they saw something. They saw some progress. They saw things. So and I don't doubt that. So
does that son of a farmer image still resonate? Because I can see a picture of him with the hat on, which also looks to me like Roh Moo-hyun sometimes, because Roh Moo-hyun would wear similar hats in a field.
Oh my God! Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so put those two together. But does that image of Park Chung-hee as being one of the people, not an elite, not a Yangban descendant, but rather because Lee Seung-man was Yangban descendant, wasn't he? And Yoon Bo-sun.
Yoon Bo-sun was a Yangban too. Yeah.
So that's his image, Park Chung-hee. He's rural. He drinks makgeolli out of a cup. And
yeah. Again, it's a very carefully curated image, of course. But again, in his life, again, we do know that from earlier sources, first-hand accounts of people who actually knew him personally. He detested farm work. He ran away from home many times. Yeah. Part of a reason why he joined the initially went to the teachers college and then joined the army, the Japanese Imperial Army, was that he didn't give a shit, excuse my language, about farming. He didn't care, and he loved booze, very sophisticated booze, even in the 50s, long before he became the president. Whiskey was a big favorite of his, and of course, people always joke about Chivas Regal, this particular type of whiskey that that he was drinking on the night of his assassination. But anyway,
Is that why it's so popular here? Because
I
it's
think
just,
so.
is that right?
I think so. Yeah.
Wow.
Without it, I mean, it's a no-name, almost like a no-name brand, really, outside of Korea. I mean, it is known somewhere, but then not as big as what you see here.
Yeah, here it's everywhere. So this is a man that joined the Japanese army in Manchuria, was a communist, and then played up his farmer roots to become president.
He was an opportunist, but again, at the same time, a lot of boaters who are mostly sons of farmer, sons and daughters of the farmer, and had a pretty much like kind of a similar experience. I think. That resonated quite well with them. So there's no doubt about that. But again, of course, now that we see the big picture, and again know much more about the man himself, or like his legacies and his cronies, and what he was doing for his entire life. And again, I would say that the best way to describe him is that he is a really, really big time opportunist. Like, he really wanted to pursue things that sounded almost sexy to him in his time, like at the time. And I don't really think he was thinking far into the future, even during the presidency. So again, it's another myth that he was this, great leader who had opened up the past for the whole nation and whatnot. It's not how it is. That's not the picture that we see as a historian.
We spoke about Lee Sung-man's wife, the first lady. Park Chung-hee's wife, the first lady, she was assassinated in 1974 on Liberation Day. Is there? And then the story I've heard is after that, Park Chung-hee gets up and finishes his speech.
Oh yeah, you can see it. You can see it on the film. There's a film footage of him doing exactly that. I mean, she was carried away, spouting blood all over the place. But then he came up and finished his speech. I mean, he immediately went to the hospital immediately after that was done. And it certainly, I think it certainly devastated him. I mean, from what I understand, judging from all these testimonials and everything. But yeah, well, I mean, he was a military man for many years. For the first 20 something years of his life, he was a military guy. He was a soldier. So he definitely had a strong sense of duty, which is again something that people actually like at the time. You have to realize, again, back in the late 1950s and early 60s, part of the reason why people did not oppose the military coup in 1961 was that people actually had very high hopes on military. Because they have rules, they have reasoning, they have they are trained, and they have manners, so and so and so forth. So you have to realize if you read books, if you read magazines, even this very anti-Lee Syngman magazine like Sasanggye, they are still fairly positive about about the military, even before the 1961, and of course after 1961, for until about 1963, when they realized, so to speak, that Park Chung-hee was showing his true colors, if you will. Up to that point, from 61 to 63, some of the more democratic, liberal, democratic inclined kind of people, democracy inclined people, they did not have qualms about the military, because again, in the whole years of confusion and destruction and all that after the war, the military was seen as somebody who can actually save them, and somebody they can trust. So people has to understand that. And again, Sasanggye, I just mentioned about it, and there's another big thing about Sasanggye, this particular magazine, and its publisher Chang to be this champion of democracy and so forth. They have their problems too. They were very vehemently anti-Lee Syngman for sure, but it's not because they had seen something about Lee Syngman or something to criticize upon, but more or less they were arguing that the country was not American enough. It was not Americanized enough, because these people were extremely pro-American. You have to realize that too.
Was Park Chung-hee anti-American?
It's different. Like it's different. Like I could say that he could, and quite a lot of other people can say that. He probably never fully trusted the Americans ever. But then he, again, because he was a wonderful opportunist, he wanted to play games with them. And I think that was probably what he was up to. So he was getting increasingly anti-American in the later years, especially during the Yushin presidency. And of course, if you watch the footage with Jimmy Carter visiting, having a state visit 2 months before Park Chung-hee was assassinated. Yeah, like you could see that they were not happy. Both of them are very unhappy looking because, again.
One of my favorite photos of Park Chung-hee is him sat in the White House with dark sunglasses, a cigarette, just sat next to JFK, looking like a mafia.
He was not, He was not yet to be in that photo. I think he was not yet to be the president at the time. He was still the chairman of this, organization that I was telling you about. And some people actually had arguments about it back in the day. If you actually read it, if you read the contemporary accounts in the press. People assume that the reason why he wore sunglasses in front of JFK was that he didn't want JFK to see his eyes because he was very, very nervous about it. Because again, JFK and the American government at the time still haven't completely figured out who this was. I mean, which side, political side, left or right, that Park Chung-hee was aligning into. Trying to align himself into. So I think they were a little bit cautious on him, and I think Park Chung-hee knew that, and probably didn't want to. He still wanted to do the poker face, but again, Park Chung-hee is he was a simple person. There's no question about it. I don't think he had mastered the technique of the act of putting a poker face. I don't think he could. So
I love that that photo. Just as we maybe close Park Chung-hee, this is not a historian question. But I read sometimes about the leader of Cameroon who's been in power since 1980, 1981.
Or something like that.
Yeah. There are presidents that stay on far too long. Was the best thing that Park Chung-hee did for Korea to get shot? Because it meant he left, right? And the second part of that is, did the American CIA have anything to do with it?
Probably not. Well, I don't think CIA was working on that. I mean,
because they would have been unhappy with him.
They were quite unhappy with him, but then they had other pressing businesses. They had issues with Iran. They had other issues at the time, so things were quite complicated on that side. But then the Korea-American alliance was still very ongoing. Of course, there were Carter was at the time was threatening Park Chung-hee to withdraw the troops, but again, it probably never couldn't never happened anyway to begin with. It was a bluff, I think. No. You might actually say that. If he stayed on stayed in his power for far too long, and we already start to see a little bit of that in what we call the Puma Hangjeng or Busan Masan riots, the anti government riots. It was getting big. It was getting really big. We do have first-hand accounts that Cha Ji-chul, the head of then head of the KCIA, was actually saying something like something to Park Chung-hee personally, saying that the Cambodians killed off thousands and millions of people. Can we just do that as well? So he literally said that, apparently. It is very much attested by a number of people who actually heard that conversation. Park Chung-hee didn't say a word about it, but, if the whole fiasco continued to go on like that, who knows? I mean, Park Chung-hee was getting old. He was 63 at the time when he was assassinated. 62. I'm sorry about that, but he was getting more at ease and getting more drunk with his own power, I think. So who knows? But then, of course, what came after Park Chung-hee in 1979 and 1980, especially in 1980, of course, it was also quite troublesome and quite tragic, of course, as you know.
Before we get there, can we do Yun Bo-sun? Basically, I just want to do Korean presidents with you at the moment,
Okay.
Jihoon. This is fantastic. And I also want to ask you about Sasanggye. But Yoon Bo-son, this person in between Lee Seung-man and Park Chung-hee, that you said he claimed to be the spiritual president.
정신적 대통령. Yeah.
Oh, 재밌어요. Can you bring him to life a little bit for us, please?
The thing about Yoon Bo-son is that he comes from a long generations of landowners, quite prominent family.
Okay.
Haepyeong-yoon family, and he lived in this palatial house, of course, of which is still you can see in the in Anguk Station, near the Anguk Station.
Wow.
One of the probably the only surviving late Joseon, early 20th century, like stately home, still owned and like lived by the descendants. He was not a collaborator. He was definitely anti-Japanese, which is probably the reason why he became, right after the liberation, he was seen by the Americans and immediately appointed in various admin positions. I think as an admin person, I think he served as a mayor of Seoul for some time, and he also had a lot of positions in the government. I think it suited him. I think he was quite capable as an admin person, but he was definitely not made for politics. And of course, things got really quirky when he was elected the president in October 1960, and but then because of the this powerful, like, people are getting sick and tired of powerful presidents because they just got rid of Syngman Rhee. They then made the cabinet and of course the National Assembly more powerful than the president at the time, which he didn't like. And of course, Chang, his opponent, it's kind of like bizarre to say an opponent because he was his prime minister. But Chang was definitely not on the, he was definitely on the opposite side of, Yoon Bo-son at the time. So they did not get along. Yeah, but that's pretty much I can tell you, how much I can tell you about. He studied archaeology, by the way, in University of Edinburgh.
In Edinburgh?
Uh-huh. So
he spoke English.
He spoke English quite well. Apparently, with a little hint of Scottish accent.
Yeah.
Peter Bartholomew, my old friend, when he was alive, he told me a story when he actually met Yoon Bo-son sometime in the early 1980s. And and he was so perplexed by the fact that how on earth this old Korean man are speaking with this little Scottish accent.
Yeah.
But he was.
Because of Edinburgh. Was at that time, you mentioned Changmyeon and Yoon Bo-son being on opposite sides. Was it then kind of Conservative Party and Democratic Party as we have it today? Were they
not necessarily? No.
Okay.
This was all Minjudang. But the Minjudang was also divided at the time with the Minjudang Kupa, the old faction, and the new faction, Minjudang Shipimpa, and that all continued well into the 1970s, 60s, and 70s. Minjudang, then Shinmindang, and all that. So from then on, of course, Kim Dae-jung, Kim Young-sam, and all these big names show up in the late 60s as faction leaders. But again, this is too early for that. But this was still Minjudang, but the Democratic Party. But then at the same time, they were not really. Again, there were so many there had been so many political suppressions and like voices not to be heard, not to be heard freely. There had been many, public opinions about all kinds of stuff. Like, for instance, one big thing that people were quite worried about around that time in 1960 and 61, before the coup, was of course this possibility of joint student meeting at Panmunjom. Like college kids all college students from South Korea should go to Panmunjom and have a little joint meeting with the equivalents from the north, and like they will try to discuss about the possibility of reunifications and all that sort of thing. But obviously the politicians didn't like the idea because it's like first of all, it's a PR nightmare, and secondly, there was no way in hell they could actually pull this off. But then, people wanted it. People demanded it at the time. But then they had no other choice but to just admonish them. They couldn't like arrest people or anything, because if you do that, of course, you're no different than Lee Syngman or any of his cronies. But they, like, if you read all these like newspaper columns and the statements and all that, it becomes quite obvious that they were like kind of clueless on what to do with this. And and people definitely had some sense of political instability, not necessarily in the sense of like things not get done or anything, but it's just about all these all of this sudden flood of demands. That, I think, perplexed quite a lot of people at the time. And again, so at the time in May 1961, when Park Chung-hee led his coup and successfully did what he wanted to do, I think many people just saw it as kind of like, because the military is always so reasonable and so ruly and whatnot, so they could like they are here just for setting things straight. But then, yeah.
They had simple answers to difficult questions, and those simple answers appeased people in some way, whether they were the right answers or not.
That also created more problems. Again, I keep telling you this, and I will say this over and over. Simple answers are not going to solve anything. Because, well, look at your world right now. Look at the world we are living in right now. This is so complicated. And do you think that 60 people living 60 years ago were anywhere different? No. We always have complications, and getting simple solutions to any of that, like, it doesn't help. No, that's my honest opinion about that.
I said I was done with Park Chung-hee, but I've got one more before I ask you about Sasanggye, which was how many people died under his reign? Because I'm about 200, but I've heard people say million and things like this. But there are different levels, and I think it's important, that the numbers of people that died under Mao and Stalin. You mentioned Cambodia earlier, Pol Pot. Under Park Chung-hee, 18 years, 61 to 79. How many people died, went missing? A rough
hundreds, perhaps.
Yeah.
That's probably the best guess we can get out of. But then, it's the thing about Park Chung-hee was that every major, like, conspiracies, if you will, that was supposedly uncovered by KCIA, a lot of them were just like made up, really. We know that as well. But
what do you mean, sorry, by these conspiracies?
Like the ring of North Korean spies roaming about in like South Korea, or like especially among like within the college circles, for instance. That is like pretty groundless. This is quite. Again, there's no evidence that there were like North Korean like agents who came over to Korea and guised themselves as like college kids. No, there was no way in hell. No, so a lot of these like so-called spy ring incidents and all that, like and there were quite numerous of them. There were quite a lot of them, but so if you combine all of these things, all of these victims, you might say, again, numbers aren't important at all. It's all about we do need to acknowledge that human rights abuse was actually happening. There's no way to deny all this. Like even even Park Geun-hye herself had to admit that during her campaign during her presidential campaign, because she had to acknowledge this. It's a baggage for her as well. So I would say hundreds, and of course maybe if you want to add all these little incidents like the 국가보안법, the national security law, and it definitely was quite severe, the measures that they had. If you want to add all of that, then I would say maybe a few thousands maybe. But then it's not the big massive scale like what was happening in Vietnam or Cambodia or anywhere in the 70s. So it's not that bad if you want to be clear about it. But millions, that's definitely a far-fetched claim. But then again, people suffered in one way or the other. But again, was it all because of Park Chung-hee? No, I don't say that. I can't say that.
You've made him round. It's wonderful. Sasanggye? Can you say something about? And you mentioned, who is it? Jung Jae-hoon?
No. Chun-ha.
Chung-ha. So can you tell us? This was an editorial magazine.
It was a magazine.
Was it important? Is it important to know about?
It is quite important because again, it was like, so it was a very kind of like a high-end type of a magazine. It was not, and it was quite popular among the journalists, like the cultural elites and the college kids, college students, academics and whatnot. And most of the people who are contributing to these to this magazine was also academics and journalists and all sorts of people. So it's definitely for the more or less of a high-end type of a magazine. It was ostensibly, founded by this guy, Chang Jun-ha, who was an interesting figure. I'm not going to go too much detail for it now.
What was interesting about him? Tell me. Do you have an Austrian wife?
Well, he was drafted by the Japanese army, but escaped and joined the provisional government and became the secretary, one of the secretaries to Kim Gu. Wow. So interesting man for that, for that alone. But then he was also very early on. He was very, very fervently anti-communist as well. So part of the reason why he set up this magazine was to introduce all these new ideas, new way of thinking, 사상, thoughts. So starting with let's say Karl Popper or Bertrand Russell, or all these like big philosopher names, philosopher, writer, Eric Fromm, of course, all these people. So a lot of these writers, philosophers, and not over the mostly English-speaking world was first introduced to Korea through this magazine, through translations. It was funded by CIA. We know that because again,
American CIA.
Yeah, American CIA.
Okay.
Indirectly.
Yeah.
But through different measures of different measures and different kinds of things.
Why would they fund it?
Because this is a big picture. Again, you have to see the big picture. So back in the 50s, the United States Information Service, as well as CIA, was very determined to set up this very strong sentiment against the communists, against communism. And they thought the easiest way to do it is to show the American might through culture and through, like literature, movies, you name it.
Soft power.
Anything, soft power. Yeah, that's what we call soft power. Back in the day, they didn't have that word. But again, they had indirectly. I don't think Chang Jun-ha actually knew where he was getting the funding. He had this label coming from it's coming from some foundation in America or whatever. But yeah, he probably didn't know that it was actually CIA money. But we actually do know this now. Another example of why we actually know better about the past and the people who actually lived in that time. So this was very vehemently anti-Syngman. So people always paint this magazine as this kind of like champion of democracy kind of a magazine. Yes, they did argue about the importance of democracy, but only in the American sense. And their criticism really is about Korea is way, way behind. They are you really need to do the due diligence to catch up with the Americans because we are quite, backwards compared to what the Americans are. So if you actually read the writings of the Sasanggye from the 50s, you will see that it really uses a lot of racist words. Korea is backward, dirty, lazy and whatnot. So it's very much so. But again, it's also reflecting some of these, cultural and, literary circle philosophers, journalists, whatever. Because again, these are high elites, and they didn't necessarily saw Korea as this this wonderful place to be. In the 60s, however, after the fall of Syngman, which they lauded, of course. 61, they were initially, like I said, quite applauding to what Park Chung-hee was doing because they had high hopes on the soldiers. But again, in 63, of course, when Park Chung-hee had become civilian, again, the whole big promise of it, what Park Chung-hee initially claimed to, was that, after the fiasco is done, after everything is in order, like we will go back to our place.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, sure. Like the military went back to their place. It's just that
Park Chung-hee
had become a civilian of his own and, ran for the presidency. And by that point, of course, Chang Jun-ha and Sasanggye, the magazine, had become very anti Park Chung-hee as well. And of course, Chang Jun-ha later actually joined the Syngman-dang, the Democratic Party, and became a politician of his own. And it went on for quite a number of years until it was closed for this publishing this piece of poetry by Kim Ji-ha in 1970. It's called Ojok, the Five Bandits. That was the end of it. Yeah. So Kim Ji-ha had his first breakthrough through Sasanggye as well. So again, quite charged. Now, Chang Jun-ha's son is actually is trying to revive the Sasanggye magazine all over again.
Okay.
So I not so long ago, I saw ads for it, and they also want people to advertise on it and so forth. And they are touting themselves. They are posing themselves as to be champion of democracy all over again. But then it is quite charged. Like I said, especially what they were doing in the 1950s. Again, if you try to republish some of these things, it's not gonna have any good audience to it because again, it uses so many of these racist words in it, racist and racially, or all very defecating kind of lingo. So,
I didn't know Kim Ji-ha. Kim, the underground, the basement writer, the pen name. I didn't know his piece, The Five Bandits, closed that. That must make it sort of notorious, infamous. You did this work that was so great, it got our whole magazine shut down. It's that's awesome, but also thanks.
Right, again, so it's all these major moments that actually again paints the picture of this magazine, the whole publication, as vehemently anti-dictators, dictatorship and anti-whatever. But no, and you have to realize this was 1970. This is 2 years before Yushin. Was not if it happened in Yushin, you can say that yes, it was very anti-democrat, anti. Dictatorship and whatnot, but no, that didn't happen. And another big interesting thing, since you just gave me the opportunity to say so, it's all very complicated again, so I'm trying to keep it as brief, but one of the chief editors of the piece, Shin Sang-cho, was also considered to be the father of Semaul movement. Because so he
Semaul Undong, New Village Movement.
The movement. So the New Village, which was of course the big pet project of Park Chung-hee himself.
Looks like
because he changed sides. He changed sides again ultimately. So again, it's quite complicated to say about the true legacy of Sasanggye in a simple term because again, it had a lot of different aspects to it, and again, another thing is again, context is important. You have to realize what was going on at the time of the publication of specific pieces and stuff. So,
is the historian Lee Nam-hee? She wrote Minjung Mandulgi,
right?
Making of Minjung. Was the Minjung actually a thing, or is that just an academic term? Because we're talking about sort of. Oh boy! But you know why I'm asking this? Because we're talking about Kim Ji-ha. We're talking about people sort of going against, and academics like to talk about Minjung. And
oh boy, where do I start? Now I have my own, opinions about it, but I'm not necessarily going to dismiss what Lee Nam-hee 선생님 was actually writing about or any of that. But yeah, it is suffice to say. I think I will leave it as this. It is suffice to say that the terminology of Minjung was not natural. It was not naturally formed. Again, I would say that many people, particularly some groups within the cultural elites of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s decided to coin the terminology. It's almost like the whole thing about subaltern, for instance. Yeah, I mean, Minjung in that sense, it was almost as equal as like, can a subaltern speak? Like, speak about kind of like, attitude towards it. But again, when it comes to like the actual historical entity, reality of things, it's complicated, and I'm not going to go into that bear trap right now.
Undongguan? Was that used at
Undongguan
or not?
Definitely used a lot of those terminologies, particularly in the late 80s.
Okay.
But again, Undongguan can be divided in so many different smaller factions, NLs and PDs and all that. So I'm not going to go into that direction as well, because one thing I can definitely tell you is that when it comes to like that, like mid to late 80s, 90s and onward, we don't have we don't necessarily have a historical consensus on those developments, because again, so many people are still active. So many people are like they could be our advisors. They could be our college professors here and there. Some of them are very active in politics now. So I think we do need to wait a little bit. To everything to calm down a little, so to speak.
I asked my friend Chang Suk, the author of The Logic of Compressed Modernity, about Minjung, and he looked at me, not on podcast, but just over lunch, and he said, nobody ever said that, David. What are you talking about? Because he's an older, he's retired now, but he said a similar thing to me. In between, I'm just going through time here because it's so interesting to do the presidents. In between Park Chung-hee and his assassination by Kim Jae-gu in 1979 and Chun Doo-hwan, this period.
Oh boy. Again,
in terms of the figures, in terms of the presidents and the power, because I think that's quite interesting, the way you've been doing that.
Well, we had an interim president. Choi Kyu-ha is his name. The shortest reigning president we ever had. He, if you actually read his resume, like what he was actually doing, he is probably one of the most elitist bureaucrat you could possibly find.
He looked like it in the pictures that I've seen.
Yeah, he was quite capable. He spoke English. Well-educated man. He was one of the first Koreans to actually learn about governmental policies, because he majored governmental admin in Manchuria, in Manchukuo, the university that he attended there, this Japanese project, of course. But then he was quite capable, and he was the foreign minister for many years. But then he had no opinions. He had absolutely no opinions about anything. He just did what his superiors wanted him to do, and he was the prime minister at the time that Park Chung-hee was assassinated. So, which of course made him automatically become the president, because again, the president was now absent. But he couldn't stop or didn't stop. We don't know about what Chun Doo-hwan was doing. Of course, the coup happened again in December of that year, so less than 2 months. And after that, he was pretty much stripped of his power until he finally resigned later in 1980. So, pretty much less than a year. But
what did he do later in life? You said sort of
didn't do anything.
Okay.
He literally didn't do anything. People encouraged him to write memoirs.
Yeah.
He didn't. So a lot of it, we just don't have any, we don't know anything about what he thought about stuff, or did he actually knew about the December 1979 coup? Did he knew anything about Gwangju? Did he knew anything about it? No, we don't know, because he didn't say a word. And, pretty much everything, this whole crucial period and the behind the scene kind of decisions, it's literally died with him. And there's nothing we can do. I mean, we can make conjectures, we can make educated guess about things, but then no, we can't say anything for certain.
It's strange that it's so close and yet so ambiguous, but also at the same time, I feel that you almost have to allow him to take it to his grave if you have got sort of what happened in Gwangju and everything else on your conscience, you know?
Oh yeah.
Because that would be, he must have thought, I don't know, again, it's conjecture, but if you're part of that history and you're living it and the decisions that you make result in that, it must be very difficult.
Yeah, it could have been, but then, he should have, I don't know, maybe, he must have kept letters, diaries maybe, but there's not a thing. Supposedly, he kept some diaries in his time, but then not necessarily, we don't really know when he actually kept his diaries, but his son was telling people that all of that got destroyed in a flood a few years ago. So yeah, nobody saw it. So again, he was a very crucial figure. But then, he had no allies. He had no political affiliations because he was just a Neanderthal bureaucrat. So he, even though but again, he was the one who had the most, useful and most sensitive informations at the time, but he didn't say anything. So
what we've spoken about so far seems to be that the indecisive people fall away and then the strong men take over in this period of Korean history, at least. Chang Myeon never served as president, did he?
No.
In an interim thing? And did he have an English name?
John
Chang.
John M. Chang. He also spoke fairly good English. I heard him too.
Okay.
He was the first ambassador to United States. You have to realize.
Okay.
But he was very staunch Catholic, which also caused the problem with Yoon Bo-sun because Yoon Bo-sun was a Presbyterian, and Presbyterians and Catholics traditionally in Korea don't get along. They don't. So
was Park Chung-hee Buddhist or not? Did he did things with temples or no?
He liked temples.
Yeah.
But I don't think he was he had any specific religious affiliations for anything.
Okay.
I don't think he was. He believed in himself, I think. But then I don't think he. He invited church people. He invited monks. He invited pretty much everybody. But but he didn't show any specific interest on any of that. The Protestants, some Protestants still claim that he had some kind of a secret conversion or whatever, but I that's completely out of his character.
Yeah.
So I don't.
Just going from beginning to end, the religious affiliation of most Korean presidents seems to be Christian.
Oh yeah.
Of various denominations.
Various denominations. Yeah.
Not Buddhist, not atheist.
So we have
Kim Dae-jung, Catholic.
Kim Dae-jung and Moon Jae-in are Catholics, and but Roh Moo-hyun famously had none.
Okay.
He was pretty much on the verge of atheistic side, I think. But Chun Doo-hwan was a very Buddhist.
I was at Baekdamsa yesterday. There's the room where he spent,
right.
didn't he? So Chun Doo-hwan is a friend of Park Chung-hee's. Are they friends?
I wouldn't say friends. He was a young supporter. He definitely worshipped Park Chung-hee to a certain extent, I think, as this big hero, I think. But he was in the military cadets when the coup began, but he actually led the cadets to actually have this marching in the middle of the streets of Seoul to show the support of the military cadets. So that also earned Park Chung-hee's faith in him, so to speak. But then he was kind of waiting in the wings, and he was if you just see his track record up to that point, up to 1979, he was doing his job. He was doing a job as a military guy, a general.
Was he in Vietnam?
Don't think so. No.
Okay.
But he was mostly in, what do you call it? The guards. I mean, the capital city, defense and that sort of thing. But but then I think it took quite a big surprise at the time that Chun Doo-hwan actually started a coup, because it was all he was waiting in the wings, and we do know that now that starting in the mid 70s he was already concentrating his power and influence and within the army with this organization known as the Hanahue, ostensibly the military academy alumni group, but then much more than that. Yeah, that was pretty much that.
What's the reaction to his coup d'etat? And I guess, and how do coup d'etats become possible? It's outrageous, isn't it, that you would have this democratic country with institutions and that soldiers, not once, but twice, at least.
Twice, yeah.
3 times if we're counting more recently.
Oh, boy.
How do we assess his coup d'etat? How do we assess his
Again, he took, I think it took everyone by surprise.
Yeah.
Again, because people didn't like his superiors, Chung Soo-hwa, the commander-in-chief, he hadn't had the faintest idea. And of course, initially, we do know that when the whole thing started, they didn't have a complete information, or nor did they actually believe that Chun Doo-hwan or No Tae-woo and all these people were involved in it, because again, why would they? But then they did, because Chun Doo-hwan probably thought about it for a long period of time. But then it completely took everyone by surprise, and Choi Kyu-ha had no other nothing but to acknowledge it, voluntarily giving up his powers pretty much. Even though he did not resign until much later, but he pretty much gave up on that, and and had another above law organization set up by Chun Doo-hwan and all that, and it was during this time then of course the Gwangju happened in 1980. So we'll see.
Is Chun Doo-hwan, his personality, is he a round character? Because most people, I think, go to Hwang Jung-min's recent characterization of him in a movie, and
he's playing Hwang Jung-min is
crazy.
Well, Hwang Jung-min is playing Hwang Jung-min.
Yeah,
that's my way of putting it.
Yeah.
Chun Doo-hwan was a very measured guy. Apparently, he was a very measured person, very reserved also. But then he definitely had a huge, I don't know, following among his peers and some of the, some of the ones who are in the lower ranks, of course. He was popular. He was popular among his peers and within the military people, and he had a excellent, track record of, being, doing his job well. So but then again, like I said, it seems that everyone took it as a surprise, and of course, people genuinely wanted to fight against it immediately, because this was not acceptable. This is a 2-star general, fighting against and arresting the commander-in-chief and fighting against pretty much everybody, every other groups, the units and the battalions and everything, that was quite flabbergasting perhaps to them, but well, in the end, he succeeded. Again, we are not completely sure on how everything went into. But then, of course, when the Yongsan, the Ministry of Defense was taken, probably people thought, the army, much of the army at the time thought this was pretty much it. So that's probably how things went. And again, it is so crucial what Choi Kyu-ha was doing at the time, but we don't know.
That lack of knowledge is very irritating to you, isn't it? I can feel it. It's like we need to know what happened here. The rise of the middle class, the sex,
80s,
sports, screen,
the 3S's.
3S's, baseball.
Which is sort of like a bread and circus kind of situation at the time. But,
yeah. How do we understand? I know I'm skipping Gwangju at the moment, but I just want to get the 80s, and Chun Doo-hwan, his time in power, because he also walked away. He had no choice to, really, but how did he do? Can I start you off by just saying that when he died and it was his funeral, I was going on television, and my PD said to me at the time, just before I walked on, she got me and she said, "David, remember, nobody likes him." And that's what she told me, and she was almost trying to tell me, don't be neutral, don't be down the middle. There's deep history here, and that's just what she said as an individual, not as a historian. So I'm asking you
again, he did things like Gwangju, and of course throughout his years, we had the Angibu, the Samcheong Gyeokdae, and all these hundreds of. I mean,
can you say what Angibu is quickly?
Angibu, the national, which is the later formation of the KCIA,
the scary people,
like the intelligence organization. But instead of actually doing the intel work, they rather actually used it for making surveillances on politicians and even some common people, like average people. But anyhow, Samcheongyukdae, of course, was this so-called social purification methods that they did. Literally just, ostensibly, like arresting and collecting thousands of beggars, thieves and, like petty criminals to be revamped into this new, rejuvenated persons. But of course, in reality, it was more or less of a labor camp.
That's horrible.
Quite horrible, but, and we don't have the complete scope of things because, again, lacking the hard evidence and like documentations, because they deliberately destroyed a lot of it. So it is still quite complicated, and we have all kinds of other like issues. And of course, by '87, of course, the student like movement, the crackdown they had, which resulted several deaths, as we know, Park Jong-chul, Lee Han-yeol, and all that, and quite a number of others.
Can I come back to this purification thing? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but adoption overseas of Korean people, because many of them contact me, that rose incredibly during the 80s as the country was getting richer. It's not a result of war here.
No.
And then you're also talking about the purification of homeless people and things like this. Can you say something about what's happening here? This purification of society.
So the purification of society,
does it have a Korean term?
사회정화, as they call it. That also goes with the Olympics, because Korea managed to secure the rights to host the 1988 Summer Olympics in 1981. Baden-Baden, and people still know that. And of course, Chung Ju-young, who was, of course, the chairman, Hyundai at the time, who was quite responsible for this at the time.
Did they pay for it? Did they get it? Because this is only a year after Gwangju, and they get given it while it's not a democracy. Or was it fair and square?
Kind of fair and square, I think. But anyhow.
Yeah.
But then, so after that, somebody, I mean, again, I'm trying to simplify things here a lot, but then somebody within the Chun Doo-hwan circle said that we have so many things that we should not show to the foreigners. So again, all these beggars and like homeless people, or like people that are not desirable, so to speak. Again, that's a very chilling types of words, but again,
disabled people or people with
disabled people, of course, disability was a big thing too. Something that was not somebody who was not worthy, so to speak, worthy of being visible. So they did awful lot of these things. I mean, so they sent so many people in these camps. So many, some of them were, deliberately sent to the army, and of course, goodness knows what. They didn't necessarily need to serve there, but then they did. And what else? I mean, there were quite a lot. But again, this is relatively uncharted territories again, because so many things are yet to be uncovered. We still have a lot of, when it comes to like historians, when it comes to like modern history, contemporary history is concerned, the cutoff date now, so to speak, is early 80s. Because this is how much of the information is available to the public now at the National Archives and such. But again, it'll take another decade or so before all these other things will be declassified and to be shown to the public. So until then we can't really say anything for certain, but then again we can make some conjectures. We can always make educated conjectures, if you will, and of course the reports and the media accounts and all that sort of thing, which is quite plentiful. So the big irony about the 80s, of course, that during the Chun Doo-hwan years, the Korean economy boomed, like far much more so than the Park Chung-hee era. This is another big irony, because people always assume that Park Chung-hee era was the most economically like prospering time period. No,
80s.
like it was the 80s. It was the Chun Doo-hwan era. I mean, the whole size of the GDP, for instance, at the time of Park Chung-hee's inauguration in 1963, an average Korean person would earn $63 a year, right? By the time he died, it was roughly about $1,000 a year. And by the end of the 80s, it was close to 6,000.
Wow.
So 1,000 to 6,000. I mean, 60 to 1,000, that's a lot. But then from 1,000 to 6,000, that's even more.
You might also say that the 60 to 1,000 is the hardest one to get going. You need that kickstart. Lee Tae-young, the documentary maker,
right?
He does Modern Korea and things for KBS here. On one of his on the 80s, there's people saying that in the 1980s, around 70% of Koreans thought they were middle class. They classified themselves as middle class, and you have this footage of them buying stocks and buying cars and all of this thing. There's this economic rise of the 80s, alongside the complexity of this social purification,
social purifications, and obvious and blatant, human rights abuses and discriminations and all kinds of social troubles that still hampers us today. The legacies, right?
Is it right? We should do Gwangju before we do 88 and then perhaps bring it to a close for today. I went to a talk on Gwangju the other day and the person didn't say anything about Gwangju. They were almost scared.
Right.
I show my international students, just as a way of introduction, the movie A Taxi Driver. Just to get, not to say it's history, but just to get these people who, they don't have time to read history books, they're international students. How do historians understand Gwangju? Is it very simple?
It's quite simple.
Yeah.
Again, this is a moment, quite unique moment in Korean history, where the central government, was deliberately suppressing and they actually sent military troops to suppress a certain group of its own citizens for not because of any real sense of national security issues, but just because they supported the Kim Dae-jung and all these other I wouldn't call liberal, but again the ones that the government didn't like. That's it. There's no other. It's quite unequivocal. There's no other way to describe it. But then part of the problem now is that there are so many challenges contesting, if you will, about the validity of these claims, and it's not much of a claim per se, because again, it's something that is quite established. Even without all the disclosures of sensitive documents, declassified documents or whatnot. I mean, it's quite clear something tragic and something enormous just took place. But then there are still people, especially for the last 5-6 years, that especially coming out of the far right circle, who actually challenges the validity of these claims. And a lot of them, of course, are saying that these are this is actually a communist kind of a insurrection, if you will, that was actually fighting against the legitimate government in Seoul and all that. This is all lack of a better term, bullshit. There's no other way. But then what I actually see in these claims, Gwangju revisionism, if you will. I see a lot of striking similarities between this and Holocaust denial, because they do not understand, they completely dismiss the notion of the convergence of evidence. We have photos, we have recounts. We have first-hand accounts, second-hand accounts. We have Americans, we have the Germans, we have Australians, French, who actually were in Gwangju, actually reporting these events, saw what was actually happening. We have photos coming not just from the Gwangju people, but Gwangju people themselves, but from the government, the perpetrators. When I say perpetrators, I mean specific soldiers, foot soldiers, and people who actually went in Gwangju because of their orders. They had spoken. The victims had spoken. Yeah, there's no other way. But then it's always about all these like deniers, if you will. They always go out there and say, oh, according to this statement, this was like that. This was so and so and so. But then, according to this other person's statement, this is something else. There's a discrepancy. So therefore, we cannot believe this. No, this is not how it works. The whole thing about the way that we say about the past, this is all universal. Like to any, any studying of history. Yeah, history is not built on just one or two facts. You really have to see the big picture with hundreds of thousands of facts and testimonials and whatnot. And we do what we call historical criticisms because, again, we need to figure things out. We need to figure things out. Some of them are less, like some of the accounts could be less reliable than others. I mean, I give you one thing. Again, I feel more confident and comfortable when I talk about colonial era. So going back to the March 1st movement of 1919, some people now claim that Yu-Gun-sun didn't exist because, well, we have a photo of her. We have her. Her brother's descendants still living around, and then we have we have her home, and we have a museum. We have her we have people who knew her and all that. But apparently, this is all because of the film. I think it's called Hango, that came out a few years ago with Ko Ah-sung playing the lead. Playing Yoo Gun-sun. We actually have two first-hand accounts of her fellow inmates from 1919 when they were all incarcerated in the Seoul prison in the summer of 1919. Both of them actually believed that Yoo Gun-sun lived, and they swore that they actually saw her outside of prison after they were being released. But it's because you have to realize though, this account, this testimonial was recorded in 1984, 70 years after that.
People are old.
Yeah, and these people were old.
Yeah.
So they just misremembered things. But then because of that, and they could not get much details about their actual inmate life and whatnot. And one of them actually ended up going to the prison quite a few more times in her life because she was very staunchly anti-Japanese. So yeah, all these memories got mixed up in her. But yeah, this is not, we do not take any of these testimonials in face value. We don't do that. This is not how historians work their stuff. Every evidence points out that Yoo Gun-sun died in 1920 while still in prison. Probably had, not because of torture or anything, although she did get tortures by the Japanese police, but it was probably, dysentery that she suffered at the time. But, that's how it is. And we have, we don't have her graves, but, we knew where she was buried initially in Itaewon. So, yeah.
No, she was buried in Itaewon.
Yeah, she was buried in Itaewon because Itaewon was a gigantic cemetery at the time. But yeah, so that was how it is. But then...
when did it stop becoming a gigantic cemetery?
1936, because in that year, they dug up the entire cemetery and cremated them all and put them on the gigantic piece of thing. I did a video with Bart about that.
Okay.
In Manguri, where all these cremated remains are buried. Anyhow.
I love Bart's work. Is there a danger, as we are coming towards the end, you're doing great. Is there a danger that sometimes, you talked about Holocaust deniers being similar to the people that sort of discredit Gwangju. Is there a danger that if we make a conversation illegal, that sort of gives certain people in society this kind of like, oh, then it must be true, and it's like a personality quirk? Or
I mean, nobody can actually, everybody's entitled to their opinions. I can say that.
Yeah.
This is how democracy works. And even like most of the time, of course, when people say about things or like spread these misinformations about it, most of the time, I don't think they have any nefarious intent. It's just that, they don't know better about it. But at the same time, I'm also going completely against the idea of, setting up specific types of laws or like legal measures to control or impose on this notion of correct history. Because like I said, there's no such thing as correct history. The way I describe about it is that, there's no such thing as correct history, but I can say that, I personally believe that we need to do, what we can do as a historian, I think there's something that is to be called as attainable history. Because again, this is probably what we can do. We can't go to the past. We can actually see them in our own eyes. We can't do that. But just like what I just said, convergence of evidence. Go through all these sources. Go through be it text, be it video, be it film, be it photos, testimonials, whatever. You go through all that, and by doing so, you just try to determine what was the most plausible and what was the most probably the attainable sequence and turn of events that actually ultimately led to something else also. So again, that's one way to do it. But then so many politicians now, especially on the liberal side of things lately, they are trying to impose this idea that, we should actually set up some laws about making it criminal to dismiss Gwangju or whatever. No, that's shouldn't be done. Another thing is, I really do need to talk about this. Fact of the matter is, people don't really know about Gwangju. And people say, oh, it's in the textbooks and whatnot. How can't they know? No, this is post 1945. You see, if you ever go through the Korean school system, history is all about memorizing. They don't teach you. The teachers usually don't teach you. There are some teachers who are good and, try to, start the conversations with the students. But most of the time, Korean middle school and high schools, they don't teach you about why history matters and how, history, why history is important, that sort of thing. It's all about memorizing. Memorizing the dates, the geography, the names. That doesn't do shit, in my opinion. No. And Gwangju, especially because it's closer to our time, I can say for certain, I can vouch for certain that if you go on most Korean high school, middle school or high school exams, final exams, they have no time for this. They have no time to squeeze Gwangju at the end of the thing, because they usually do not even reach to that part. They usually try to wrap it up around 1945. Around the liberation, or perhaps if they're lucky, go to Korean War. But then they don't usually talk much about Syngman days. The Park Chung-hee regime or the Chun Doo-hwan regime, for that matter. They don't talk about it. It's all pretty much brushed off now. So what are you going to do with that? People are increasingly losing touch. Especially younger crowd, they are losing touch about it. I remember, I was born in 1989, so 9 years after the Gwangju. And, there are some people in some relatives of mine who actually heard about things, or they actually knew people who were sent to Gwangju as one of the troops, whatever. yeah, I heard these things for like secondhand, certain accounts, but now of course these the younguns, who are completely out of touch with these things, and they don't understand their grandparents' language. I mean, Korea has undergone so much changes. Again, I kid you not. I mean, if you grab anybody. If you grab anybody randomly on the street and ask them, show them a movie from 1960, let's say, Korean movie from 1960, and say, and ask them what was it all about, they can't answer that because they don't understand the language, they don't understand the rules. I mean, they can barely understand the contents of it if they had given a subtitle. The intonation is changed, the vocabulary is changed. They don't have the grasp of these things from 1960. So 1980 is still far from them. So what are you going to do with it? So it's all about literacy. It's all about making it more presentable and more accessible. And of course, historians had to do their due diligence about making it more palatable for an average audience, not just for the people who are interested in it, but just about general audience, just about making it palatable and understandable for everyone. And of course, the general audience on their part, they had to do things about. They have to understand that history is not. History cannot be simplified in single, like in real short whatever. Like you can't squeeze it into a 1 minute, a minute or so. You can't do that. So much things are happening. Try to do that for your own like damn world right now. Can you do it in less than a minute to describe 2026? No, you can't do that. So.
Requires a lot of humility, I found, because as well, the more I study something like Gwangju, the more I realize how difficult it is. And the more you read and the more you study, the more you realize, oh, wow, this is not easy. It is easy, but it's also complex, and you have to read different things, where it feels like a lot of the time now it's emotive and it's done with numbers and symbols, and these generate emotions in people rather than, as you say, looking at the convergence of information and reading all and this one and this one and this one. It takes humility, it takes time, and it's hard work.
Yeah, I mean, I really hope that people should actually know doing history. I mean, studying history is, again, excuse my French, fucking hard. It really is. I mean, I had to learn 5 languages, besides my own Korean, of course, but old Korean, Chinese, Japanese, English, whatever. And I do have other grasp of some practical knowledge on some other languages as well. Yeah, I mean, I can still do. I mean, I'm doing all that, and still, I could be quite perplexed about what I find about stuff. I mean, and you're telling me that you watch, 1 minute of video on YouTube and know everything about the Korea's past. I mean, that's not how it is done. Nobody can do that. I mean, anybody can do whatever if they want to, if that's true. But again, that's not how it works.
Let me ask you one last question for today, and there's one last big one. But does modern Korea start in 1988, 87? Is that a big turning point? Because in some ways it's presented as it, isn't it? Right? It was all leading up. We've gone through all of these kind of dictators, military coups. Then we get to 87, 88, the protests, the first democratic election. We get civilian president. Is that a major turning point and the start of what we see today, or was it just a little bit same of the old?
Well, I don't want to believe that this is the same of the old, really. But I do see a incredible amount of changes. I mean, for the positive note, that is.
Yeah.
Since 87, of course. And again, I was born just barely right after that, almost. But again, even in my lifetime, I mean, I could see that Korea has become, more or less, it still has a lot to go, but it has become more inclusive. It has become more diverse. It has been more. It has become more accepting for a lot of things. So I just hope that we should actually continue this way. Continue to go on this way, and again, for a little bit of a cautionary note on that. Another big trend that I do see in a lot of these short form contents about history, modern history especially, is that they're using these things for pumping their own agendas, mostly racist and hierarchical and also very misogynistic as well. I see all of that as quite problematic as well. So again, that's not how you do history. And we don't take sides. Historians do not take sides. As a person, I can take sides. But as an historian, I don't want to take sides on that because that's not how you do your history. So,
well said. I'm going to close it up now, and after, if you have any final words, please share them. But ladies and gentlemen, this was Suk Ji-hoon, historian, PhD candidate, Yonsei University. Do please get in touch. Have a look for him on Instagram. I'll put the link below, or if you're on Facebook, because he does wonderful stuff online. And I'm learning from him every day, not only just in this conversation. And if you do have questions or comments about these things, try and ask, and also respect the courage and the honesty with which Jihoon has spoken today, because everything I asked him is not on these pieces of paper that we have in front of us. We prepared a completely different conversation. And then I thought, as we were going,
it's like what we did last time.
It would be interesting to talk about these presidents. And for me, I learned so much. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you did too. Jihoon, do you have any final words to close this out?
But thanks for having me again. Ever since I appeared on your podcast last time. I had lots of I had number of people who had contacted me through Instagram and Facebook and all that sort of thing, and that also opened up a lot of new connections and new a lot of meaningful things for me. So again, thanks for having me here.
I'm glad actually to work as a bridge. It's not about numbers or views, but people I know, they meet other people from the podcast, and it becomes like I get a sense of Terry Manjok or vicarious satisfaction. I become Nara Tonges or through, and it's good. And
it's like a conduit, right?
And I love it though for that. Yeah. So Jihoon, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, see you later. Bye-bye. That was fun.